My name is Samy Figaredo. I use he, him, and they, them pronouns. I identify as a queer trans man. I am an actor, in addition to being an activist and public speaker. I kind of knew who I was before I had the language for it. You know, as a kid, not having the right language, it would always be like, well, I want to be a boy, I want to be a boy. People just started saying, well, that must mean you're a lesbian. People didn't have the language for like sexuality and gender as two separate entities. I remember having to come out multiple times to my family. I think the first time I came out to my parents, I was like around 13, and I came out as a lesbian, and they were not having it. You know, my father would be like, it's the fact that we raised them in America that made them this way, this is like an American idea, or like you are mentally ill, or you know, things like that. And then for like my peers who had decided to put lesbian on me, and then I was like, well, maybe I'm bisexual. They were like, oh, you're a fake member of the community. And people today still think that like bisexuality is not valid. And then by the time I got to college, I kind of knew that I was trans. Like by that time I had sort of like discovered that word as more than an insult. I was in sort of like a situation that was abusive with a partner who did sexually assault me and would tell me like, well, who are you gonna tell, and who's even gonna love you like if you're trans? Nobody wants a trans person. And so I didn't, I don't think I came out to like everyone as trans until I was 23. People would still like sort of make their comments about my body and about, oh, well, this isn't reversible and you're gonna make a mistake. But the people who stuck around and who have become lasting friends of mine, either I made them after the fact and I just like found a new community, or it was people who had kind of like distanced themselves, right? Because they weren't sure, or they weren't supportive, or they were coming from a place of misinformation. And then, it sounds cliche, but if you were to ask them, and I have, they would be like, all of a sudden you were happy. And we saw you blossom, we saw you kind of like come out of your shell, and and we realized like we do want to be your friend. That started happening more and more, including my family. Like, and my parents would tell you if they were here, the difference between support and not, because like I would send them resources. I would recommend that they go to like a PFLAG meeting, or I would print out like pages and pages of just like whatever the most recent research was at the time, and any sort of pamphlet I found online. And sometimes they would read it and sometimes they wouldn't. But what really sealed the deal for them was just sort of seeing me happy. Mind you, I think that that's sort of like almost like a separate issue from body image, and even aside from like gender dysphoria. I remember when I started my medical transition and I found like a support group for trans masc people, there was a lot of like perpetuating toxic masculinity. One of the things was like being attracted to other men was like, for a lot of dudes, it was like a no-go. It was like, oh, why didn't you just stay a woman, was what a lot of people would say. For some guys, the presence of like non-binary and genderqueer people was enough to kind of set them off. They didn't want to be seen with them. They just kind of wanted to be seen with other dudes in their like cargo shorts and muscle tees and nobody else. Whatever kind of man you are, you better be a good looking one. And so it was a matter of like being fit or being thin. But what I ultimately realized is like, it's just sort of a matter of finding the right community. Like that group was not for me. And I had to learn to undo some of the like harmful masculine qualities that I had adopted just trying to fit in. Once I realized that was never going to happen, I had to leave the situation. I love my community a lot. Like, don't get me wrong. I love being queer. I love being gay. I love being trans. And I think that a lot of the people that I've been fortunate enough to call friends are very accepting, loving people. But I've definitely met a lot of people within the community who still perpetuate very harmful ideas of body image. I have had an eating disorder, and it's funny, like, when I developed it in high school, it wasn't even a matter of wanting to look thin or pretty or whatever. When I started withholding food, it was more of like a self-harm. Like, it was deliberately like I'm punishing myself. But, as I was punishing myself in this way, across the board, everyone's like, you look so good. And so I was being rewarded for doing something that was hurting myself, And it was one of the few times, especially at that time, trying to get acceptance from anybody, it was one of the few times people would like praise me for anything. So I was like, well, I'm just gonna keep doing it. This is what gets me about people who say that it's about, oh, I just care about your health, oh, I just care about this, that, and the other. If anybody actually knew what I was doing, they would know it was extremely unhealthy. And I had to learn to stop that. I find myself constantly bumping up against folks that have a very fundamental lack of understanding of just like what it's like to live as a queer person in America in 2020. A lot of the questions that I get from non-queer people outside of the community, even when the person is coming with the best of intentions, which I love, and their first thing is like, oh, I want to know this thing, but I don't want to offend you, I don't want to say the wrong thing. So what I tell people is, just come with whatever language you have and just the best of intentions, and we'll go from there. Like, if 9 times out of 10, your question isn't that offensive, or maybe there's like a little, like a pink flag in there that we can just kind of like, you know, take note of. Or if the language is really harmful or problematic, but you honestly don't know better, and this is just what you've learned, well, we can course correct. That's so easy. Language is ever evolving. It's a very easy fix to just kind of introduce something new. People have been perfectly respectful and welcoming and trying to be as accommodating to me as possible, and sometimes they slip. And people have used all of the right social justice language and been actively like harmful. And living as a queer person is having to constantly balance that duality of being proud of who I am and also acknowledging that like a lot of responsibility falls on our shoulders to continue the work of people before us